quite early on emerged out of looking at our maker data in the database was these kind of objects here. But the way that these objects sit in the database, when you're doing these kind of big data scrapes, it looks as though these are sound cultural makers for these objects. And it's only when you look at the individual object records that you're like, oh, these are all Europeans. We've also got objects in the collection that are required precisely because they are fakes. So this dagger was made by the notorious London forgers Billy and Charlie. They were exposed as frauds in about the 1880s. This object was actually acquired in 1894, so about 14 years after, it was very clear that this was a faked object. So I think there's also this really interesting tension where, like, by nature, a kind of fake or forgery denies the hand of its maker. And yet here, objects become collectibles precisely because of the makers. Because of this kind of tension between intimacy and distance that fakes raise, the faker might have to take steps to distance themselves from kind of owning their making of the object. But there's this incredible intimacy in studying in order to produce a fake that I think is just really a comment on the kind of the level of craftsmanship and knowledge that often goes into producing fakes.
So these are very useful teaching objects, but they somehow don't quite behave like the originals. And I noticed that people don't really engage with them in the same sort of way. If you told someone this is a 3,000-year-old object, they sort of treat it in a very particular way. So maybe this goes back to the aura which you mentioned, Beth, that these just don't have any sort of aura which really appeals to people. We have some little bits of a model of the Palace of Knossos.
So in terms of choice of materials for producing the 3D print, we didn't want something that looked real. The maquette on the right-hand side is actually printed in sandstone. That was an experiment to a certain extent in how people engage with it, an experiment in durability.
I think these are sort of in-between objects, because in the exhibition itself, the model itself was regarded as something which should go in a spreadsheet and we should keep track of. But at the same time, at the end of the exhibition, it wasn't going to be something in the collection. So it does sort of, it existed for that period of time in the museum system, and now it's no longer really part of that. There's a sort of shadow.
I thought it was really interesting. I hadn't appreciated just how many decisions, because if you look at these models, you're told they're 3D models. What happens is that it completely removes the human from it, and you don't appreciate actually the amount of human decision making that's been involved. And so the question around IP then becomes really fascinating, because what can happen without placing the human at the centre of it is that they get completely removed from the story.
It's all those things are
really kind of difficult.
Only everything we have is on in this shot here.
Certain scales on absolutely everything.
Yeah,
You can have fun,
because
colour
that's
coding.
the only way to interpret, because the plan was a bit fragmentary. Because the only way to interpret it was to have a confidence score for everything. So I could sort of build it all.
Because yes, the Romans.
If you are hoping to make a beautiful axe or a spear, dispel those hopes and dreams quite quickly, because unless any of you are a secret flint napper...
Yeah, you're welcome to handle any of these bits. They're all no gloves required. It's remarkable in that for its time, it's some of the only pottery certainly in this end of the Roman Empire that is reasonably impervious to liquids. When they mixed up their slip, their liquid clay, And I think probably added a little bit of something chemically to it, probably sodium carbonate, which they would have got from seaweed ash and that sort of thing. So when they dip that in the slip and let it dries to a shine. So as soon as it's dry, it's actually shiny.
Tiny spherical invertebrates called coccoliths changed the geological makeup, and we started to have chalk forming instead of flint. And then as sea levels dropped again back into that lagoon setting, flint started to build up. So that's why in certain areas in the UK and outside the UK you get flint, chalk, flint, chalk. The thick bit here, if you go back to hitting it at that ½ centimetre depth, you will probably undercut it. I think you will, yeah.
Fast wheel. So what you do is you get it going nice and quickly, and then while it's spinning, you do as much work as you possibly can. And of course, the wheel seems to have been invented in southern Iraq, probably about 3,500 BC. Finally gets to Britain with the Romans in 43 AD. We were a bit slow off the mark. You don't want to rush into these things, do you? I'm going to get you to carve them out of the wet clay.
When I come to flake it this time, if I was to strike there, that flake has now travelled much further.
I feel like this is one of my better ones.
Okay.
I feel like I don't know why I said that before you've had a look at it.
That's confidence.
And then we've got beautiful little moulds, little punches.